Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Mandy Sally, Chief Operating Officer here at the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, and I would love to welcome you to our July Censorship Series program. I have an absolutely stacked panel this month, and I'm really excited to get right into our content. We're going to be talking about the intersection between abortion access and censorship. We haven't really tackled this topic head on just yet, so I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. Before I introduce you to my fabulous panelists, few housekeeping rules. Please feel free to make use of that Zoom chat. Would love to hear your feedback or comments on our conversation today. So please feel free to put your comments there. Also, I will be sending out a follow-up email with any of the links or resources that we mentioned today during our program, so no need to furiously jot anything down while we're talking. There will also be a recording of this discussion that goes up on Woodhull's YouTube page afterwards. So if for some reason you can't stay with us for the duration of our program today, don't worry, you can catch the replay on our YouTube, usually up within 24 hours of our program. So with all that being said, let's get into it because we got a lot to talk about today. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists and then we're going to get right into it. So first up, we have Adam Hosey. Adam is the Policy and Political Director of Planned Parenthood Pennsylvania Advocates and an advocate for creating more inclusive spaces and policies for individuals and organizations. Welcome, Adam. We have Martha Dimitratou, who is a digital strategist for women on web and Plan C. She specializes in sexual and reproductive health and rights with a scope that spans both the United States and the international landscapes. Thanks for being here, Martha. Next, we have Michelle Moore. She is the Senior Manager of Digital Strategy and Innovation at Women First Digital and works to innovate digitally and diversify sexual and reproductive health access around the digital world. Welcome, Michelle. And last but certainly not least, a familiar face, Sarah Phillips, a campaigner at Fight for the Future and a community organizer, abolitionist, creator, and I will say frequent collaborator with Woodhull. So very excited to have you all here today. And I'm just going to kick it off. Where do we see this intersection between censorship and abortion access showing up? And Sarah, I'll just start with you since I introduced you last.
Sure, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Mandy, again. Yeah, I think this question is really important. I live in Texas, where abortion access is under attack before Dobbs, and also now, obviously. And where I see censorship and abortion access intersecting today is that abortion access is a target of a lot of censorship efforts in the United States broadly right now, but especially where abortion is criminalized. We're seeing that in states where abortion is criminalized already, their next focus is how are people now getting access now that Dobbs is the law of the land, that Roe has fallen. And the what they're seeing is that people are using resources online, on social media, abortion funds that they access through the internet, resources like Plan C that give out information on self-managed abortion, abortion pills, etc. So they're seeing this as the landscape of how they can target people who are still managing to access abortion in states where it's criminalized, and also seeing that it's another way to attack abortion across the country. If they can, decrease the ability of people across the country, even in states where abortion is legal, it does affect those states as well. So we're seeing that it's kind of the next, I don't like using the word frontier, but I think that that's how they see it, right? If they can attack the ability of abortions to have websites. I think Woodhull got censored on Instagram very recently. Abortion funds are not able to have accounts on TikTok, etc. Like, they're seeing that that has actually stopped people who work in abortion access's ability to talk about abortion, to talk about abortion pills, to talk about the threat to abortion broadly. And I see it as, our duty as people who work in digital rights to see abortion access as central to our work. And that's, why we're in this, basically, is that if we're thinking about how is abortion being talked about on the internet, how are they using censorship laws to attack abortion access. That's where our work needs to be right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Michelle or Martha, you're both working online and in the US and outside of the US. Where do you see the censorship showing up?
I can just echoing what Sarah very nicely said. Plan C is also an example of a website that was threatened, is being threatened to be shut down. Internationally, we know, for example, that Women on Web's website is, blocked in countries that actually abortion is pretty legal, like Spain or, other places like Turkey or South Korea. So there is, first of all, a parallel that we see with information being not available, which not only reinforces stigma when people are trying to get information, they cannot find it. It takes a lot of the time of reproductive health organizations, abortion organizations, to try to fight this censorship, right? Small, grassroots organizations that are, really trying with all the funds that they have to try to get the word out. And it's also harmful, right? Because people don't get the right information that they need. But also we see that there is a rise in fake clinics. And we can go into this for a long time, but we can see that there is no real, transparency on how accurate healthcare information is being prioritized online. And again, we can talk for a long time, but Plan C's TikTok was shut down for a long time. Right now, our ad account is taken down. Our Instagram account has been taken down multiple times. We're not allowed to run ads on Google whatsoever. I let Michelle talk about Women First Digital, but Women on Web's website has been, very vulnerable to a lot of the Google core updates that happen by our content being demoted. So it's a constant, everyday struggle and battle, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of our energy, and it's not fair for the abortion seekers and for just everyone who wants to bring abortion access to the mainstream also.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that the fact that, of course, no, we target the United States, but also globally. But the importance of all these impacts within the US is the fact that Google, Meta, where are they from? From the United States. So of course it's like a domino effect. So what happens there affects the whole world, at least for abortion. And also this has been like worsened just because probably, I'm not sure if Planned Parenthood or I know Marta, you for sure, or other websites have experienced the same. Like they are constantly changing the algorithms. They are basing their policies on what is currently happening in the United States, and they affect how people search. So besides having, we also had Instagram ban, YouTube ban. We were able to retrieve some of them, but it's also like the search results have been affected by this. No, like most of the experiments that Google is running related to artificial intelligence are taking place in Google and in the United States exclusively. Like I'm from Mexico, I need to recall that because I'm not in your country, but like most of the experiments are taking place in your country. So once they run all the tests they want to take in your country, they are going to take them outside there. So I think that this means that the internet is still monopolized, and that's great because people's access to reliable services and resources are at risk here. So the power of content, as Marta mentioned, like all of our efforts of creating more and more content to mitigate all these algorithms, and at the same time the anti-choice strategies are like really tiring but are really needed. Hopefully we could have an open dialogue with Meta, with Google, eventually with TikTok, even though that's from China, but like that we could have like more open spaces to talk about abortion because it's important. And I'll stop that. Not sure if anyone else would like to add more to that.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear your perspective on this, Adam, as well, because Planned Parenthood, of course, is a direct service provider here in the U.S., and I would say probably the organization that's most well known for driving advocacy in this space as well. So, where do you see censorship showing up in your work?
Yeah, I think Sarah made a really great point earlier in talking about how there are different avenues that anti-abortion folks are trying to take to really attack the root and foundation of our access to healthcare. So in Pennsylvania, we have a 24-week ban. So abortion is legal, it's not accessible, but one of the ways that folks are trying to limit access and understand and our understanding of education around abortion stigma and seeing and framing this as healthcare is by trying to define what harmful content is on the internet. We've seen this in other states, Florida, even New Jersey. It's very much bipartisan because on the surface, it does seem like, oh, we're trying to protect minors from quote unquote harmful content on the internet. But what we're seeing is that there are political agendas at play as well. So we have legislators who are trying to pass legislation to put things like age verification, chat monitoring, being able to define harmful content. And that is going to be really problematic for folks who are trying to access information, whether it is in urban or rural areas. Every person should have access to their healthcare information that they need, and we know that the internet is a really great place to get that information. And it's kind of our responsibility to work with politicians to kind of tell them like, hey, there are better ways to do this if we are trying to support young people on the internet. And we have to see the intentions here because there is a pretty clear playbook in censorship when it comes to accessing information about abortion, LGBTQ plus issues, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to spend a little time getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the legislation later on in our conversation. Because I think just one point I want to make, you said this is bipartisan, and I think there's a lot of probably pro-choice legislators out there who are not understanding the anti-choice implications of some of the legislation they're pushing. So we're going to talk at length, I think, about that in a little while. But just to like take us back for 1 second, of course, this is not the first time in history that we've seen folks trying to censor information about abortion, reproductive access, sexuality in general. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, each of you, if you can tell me where in history have we seen this happen before, maybe pre-internet, and whoever would like to start, I'm happy to start with. Oh, nobody wants to take the history question? Okay, go ahead, Adam.
I
You'll
can
be the
start.
brave one.
I think the clearest example of this is with Comstock. In the Comstock laws, this is a law that we would refer to as like a zombie law, but unfortunately has re-entered the vernacular and the halls of power. Most recently, during the Mifepristone oral arguments, two anti-abortion justices referenced Comstock in their arguments and lines of questioning. So what Comstock does related to that harmful content thing, it prohibits the mailing of what is deemed as obscene materials, quote unquote. So our fear is that although it is a law still in the books, it is not enforced. Our fear is that, depending on how things go, Comstock could get revived by a Department of Justice as anti-abortion, and that would be crushing for mifepristone access. And it could even apply to like any number of things from contraception to even sex toys or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say I saw in the news a couple weeks ago that there are a group of U.S. senators who are thinking of introducing an act to repeal the Comstock Act. I don't think anything's been formally introduced, nor have I seen the text of what they're proposing, because I don't think they're proposing a full repeal. I think it's just like partial things, the parts related to abortion, contraception, reproductive health. So stay tuned for information on that. But before I move on, any other like historical examples anyone can think of where we've seen this before?
I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but I can say, for example, even with Women on Web's website and back in the day, Women on Wave, like we've seen, Women on Web keeps creating sibling websites to get the information out because their websites keep getting censored and blocked by governments, Like I said, it was the case with Turkey. I think that was the case in some countries in Southeast Asia as well, where we had a lot of censorships. South Korea, we have a huge really big lawsuit going on. So they're ongoing, and we keep getting threatened. And whether it's governments or it's actually big tech itself, it's a constant thing that keeps happening. And then, I mean, we'll probably talk about this later, but, you know, obviously things like, it's not prehistorical, but things like SB8 or any law, like what's happening right now, we're going to see in Louisiana or even in Florida. Maybe they're not directly, you know, talking about information, but still, you know, there are ways that we have seen how they're will be impacting the share of information. When SB8 came into effect, Clancy's I think all social handles at some point in the next, you know, as it was coming into effect, got taken down at some point. So we see a direct impact of these policies, or the, you know, the idea or the talk about these policies coming into effect, impacting directly our platforms.
All right. So, Martha, can you just explain a little bit more for those of us who are in the US? You know, we've definitely seen the social media censorship. I don't know that we've seen websites like taken down or banned by the government, at least not to my knowledge. So, could you just explain a little bit to our audience, like what that looks like when a website is actually censored by the government in another country?
Mm-hmm. For example, in Spain, Women on Web's website is censored by the government, and we have a big lawsuit that has been going on, which we actually won. And the court of Spain ordered the partial unblocking of our website. And what does this mean? What does this mean is that if you now are in Spain, which I think, Michelle, you are, and you search Women on Web through, to my understanding, actually, it's through the Wi-Fi connections that are from the country, meaning maybe not from your phone if you have an international phone. So it kind of depends also on the connection you have. But basically, most of the times, if you try to search for Women on Web and enter a website, it's gonna say website not found, or, you know, a message like this. Again, if you use maybe, you know, like a foreign, you know, hotspot, maybe you can access it, but yeah, it's very much unavailable. And when we talk about partial blocking, what actually the Court of Spain has ordered is that the portion of our website that shares information can still be accessed, but not the portion of the website that provides abortion access, meaning that you can order pills through. However, apparently the Spanish government said that, and I'm paraphrasing, but we don't really know how to do that. So our website is still inaccessible. I don't know if that answers the question. And a similar case is happening right now in other countries, like in South Korea, for example, and in Turkey.
Right. So when you say the government doesn't know how to do that, they don't know how to partially unblock the website, so the entire thing just remains blocked.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. And then, Sarah, I think you had a thought.
Yeah. So one point that I did want to make is that there's kind of a history in the United States of censoring information that the kind of quote unquote medical establishment, usually white, usually men, usually, you know, very academic, is uncomfortable with. And I think that there's a lot, you know, I think of Sesta Fosta, when sex workers in particular were very loud about the fact that, you know, when you censor content about sex work, you bring in all this information about abortion, about harm reduction, about sex education, etc. So when you think about obscenity in the United States and just censoring what people are uncomfortable with, quote unquote, protecting kids from information that, you know, brings harm to them, when we don't actually have consensus around what harm to children looks like, that can look very different based on the family that you're in, based on your own political beliefs, etc. We're seeing that when that kind of argument gets used, all this information about abortion, about reproductive rights, about health, healthcare, etc., gets kind of put in the same bucket. And I'm thinking about just in the history of the United States, you know, abortion was something that was accessed pre-Roe, right? Like, that's something that I always want people to remember. Like, a lot of folks in the United States have kind of a warped history of abortion in the United States because that information itself has been censored on how people were accessing abortion pre-Roe. And a lot of what we've seen over that time is that communities who needed access to abortion were finding ways, herbal ways, women who were trusted to do abortions, et cetera, in their communities that were criminalized for doing so because, like, the quote unquote medical establishment wasn't okay with them doing it in their own communities and safely, and through like a history of passing down knowledge, right? And so I just bring that up because that's kind of how I want folks to see information. A lot of what the issue is right now is that we're putting those kinds of information in the hands of big tech companies. So there's all kinds of layers here where, big tech companies don't have the well-being of these kinds of communities at heart. They don't care about abortion access. They care about the bottom line. They care about legal trouble. They care about if the United States government or a right-wing attorney general in Texas is going to come after them for hosting abortion information on Twitter, on Instagram, etc. So that's really what we have to be thinking about. It's not the first time. It's kind of just an added layer here. And how are we, as advocates, as people who care about abortion access, centering these communities that are doing what they can to access abortion, just as they have throughout the entire history of the United States, regardless of how the government cares about it. We really need to be like very committed to that. Like, again, I live in Texas. Like, the communities here are looking at Dobbs and saying, we've always accessed abortion. We need support in doing that. How are we going to stand up for those people? Like, that's really what we're thinking about.
Yeah, and I want to take over what she's sharing because I'm not sure if you remember the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal. The fact that Cambridge Analytica provided data assistance to the 2016 presidential campaigns of Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Well, I've been working at Women First Digital since 2016, and I started to see the change before and after, and it became more complicated to talk about abortion, like besides like people being against it just because it was labeled as a social issue, and that could affect like how people think when going to an election or voting or whatever. And that of course starts like censoring how we provide information. So if the robots they use to analyze our posts start detecting that you're being very political, even if you're talking about public health, but everything is connected for them, of course, it's like we're going to ban your post, we're going to take it down. At least at Women First Digital, we started to play around even with images, because we were playing around with the pills because they didn't want to show it. So we started using like a person like holding something in order to take to have an abortion, and like that we were able like to get rid of these obstacles. But it's like I'm talking about 2016 and now we are in 2024 and it's becoming more and more complicated. Like besides the anti-choice movements that they would like to ban abortion, it's also related to what Sarah already mentioned, the fact that they have an issue with whatever that could put them in the like legal highlights, and they are going to have like issues with law or whatever. And we need to rely on these big platforms for people to be able to access information. And I think that's kind of worried. And I'm not sure if it was mentioned before, but also like going back to the Comstock laws, I understand that this could affect some of our websites here. I mean, Women First Digital do not like provide access to the pills. We are more like resources and information, but the fact that this could potentially ban being able to send the pills by mail. So of course that will affect how people have access to the pills and how we collaborate. Like we know that throughout networks we connect, like if they reach to Women First Digital, of course we could connect them to Plan C, like you can obtain the pills here. But imagine in the future if these like outdated laws are accepted, how this is going to impact us. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. I think it's really important to keep all of that information in mind. And I'm really glad you brought up Cambridge Analytica. Like, we have sort of a history, a documented history of how these social media platforms have been behaving. And it's helpful for us to think about that. But I think there's sort of two forces at play right here. We've got private companies like Meta, Twitter, whoever doing their thing. But then you also have the government as sort of a bad actor in all of this. And so, I'm wondering, Adam, you brought up some legislation earlier where we're seeing censorship potentially codified. Could you expand or talk a little bit more about where we're seeing the censorship show up in the laws, in our laws?
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, there's been a half decent push to restrict access to information on the internet for young people, for minors, and that has been couched in terms of protecting youth from bullying. So one bill was very specific about monitoring the chats in social media platforms and also like gaming platforms. So aside from like the legal implication of can Pennsylvania even do that? There were some, serious questions about that, and then also the define allowing the Attorney General of Pennsylvania to define what harmful content was in this case. So depending on the ideology of the Attorney General and the governor's office, that could sway very quickly. We've seen book banning bills in Pennsylvania as well. Locally, we are seeing many attacks on our local school boards to ban access to information, and we all know who that disproportionately affects. It's Black and brown folks, it's LGBTQ plus folks, and it's sex ed. And sex ed is not required in Pennsylvania public schools either. So there's just a severe gap in knowledge about our own bodies that students are not getting K through 12. A separate bill also proposed by a pro-abortion politician, one of our allies, is a little more poignant and specific about pornography. So again, on the surface, it is about young people not having access to pornography. But if you actually read the legislation of the bill, it once again is another defining of harmful content bill because to no one's surprise, the statutes in Pennsylvania law are also severely outdated when it comes to defining what pornography or obscene content would be, and it is just exceptionally broad, and it could be weaponized very specifically to withhold really important information about our bodies and everything else.
Yeah, and we've seen very similar laws in many states, right? Like Woodhull's been really, really involved in a lot of the age verification stuff. I think there was 20 states with proposed statutes this legislative session this year. So it's happening everywhere. And Sarah, I'd love to go to you next because I know Fight for the Future has been like super involved with a lot of this legislation. Particularly our favorite proposed law, which is the Kids Online Safety Act, or KOSA. So tell us a little bit about where you see this showing up.
Yes. So, as Mandy has already said, most of my work at Fight for the Future right now is around a lot of the bills, exactly like Adam's talking about, but how they're showing up on a congressional level. And similarly, a lot of them are proposed, co-sponsored, introduced by people who would label themselves pro-choice and in favor of abortion access across the country. And one of those bills being the Kids Online Safety Act, but more broadly, we have a bunch of bills that we've termed quote unquote bad internet bills that, just frankly make the internet less conducive to abortion access, to conversations about abortion, to abortion funds being able to talk about access to, again, organizations like Plan C being able to distribute resources, but also just creators and young people who want to talk about abortion, who want to talk about gun violence, who want to talk about gender affirming healthcare, who want to talk about the issues in their communities, but the social media landscape and the legislation are pointing companies towards censorship of that content, or under the bad internet bills kind of landscape, threatening encryption and private messaging and digital privacy, so making those conversations more up to being criminalized, more up to being surveilled, etc. So those are kind of the two-pronged approaches that we're seeing, and along with age verification laws, and also just age gating laws in general, just straight up saying young people shouldn't have access to the internet. And what we know to be true is that young LGBTQ people, particularly kids of color, do better when they have access to online communities, not worse. So we're like literally do better because they have access to life-saving community and life-saving access, life-saving resources. And so for us, we want to talk about what the most marginalized young people are thinking about, what the most marginalized young people are dealing with in their everyday lives, and actually talk about policy in terms of them. So the Kids Online Safety Act, holds companies liable for information and content design features that could be quote unquote harmful to children. And they have all kinds of stipulations on that. And what my work has been really explaining explicitly to lawmakers that social media companies are not acting in interest of young people, yes. But also when you hold them liable for the content that is in front of them, and you put that that enforcement power in what, a right-wing attorney general or what's possibly a Trump administration, their definition of what is harmful to children is different than what a pro-choice lawmaker's definition of harmful to children actually is. So what we are seeing is that laws like COSA actually enable censorship and incentivizes censorship of abortion access. And in actuality, what I say all the time to lawmakers and reporters and press and parents is you have to think about how social media companies will act. And I'm not making that up. Like, I'm not talking about a situation that hasn't happened yet. I bring up Sesta Fosta all the time because what we saw after Sesta Fosta was a mass takedown of information about harm reduction, about sex education, about reproductive rights, particularly the most impacted people where Black and brown LGBTQ content creators on places like Tumblr, whose entire everything was taken down because it fell under this purview. And that's the kind of actions that we see how social media companies act. We're actually already seeing that because of pushes like COSA, Meta's already changing policy and the legislation hasn't even passed yet, right? Because it's about avoiding liability rather than the enforcement of it. Like the law could never be enforced, and also the social media companies could censor content that falls under the purview of that law. That's what you really have to be thinking about. And for one, what I see, I like to offer a little bit of hope here is that young people are super activated around this issue. They have sent over 500,000 calls and emails to Congress about these things. I'm talking to young people who are very well acquainted with Supreme Court cases now because they care about this issue. Like, they are very well acquainted with encryption. They're very well acquainted with Sesta Fosta. They're very getting educated about this because they see COSA as a book ban for the internet. That's what they see it as. And I think that has been encouraging, seeing that people are not just thinking about this as obscure tech policy, but also, young people themselves saying Congress is talking about what protects us while doing something that is going to harm us. What we actually need is housing and healthcare and better funding for our schools. And they're very frustrated. What I hear all the time is there's a book ban in my county, but this is what Congress is worried about. That's what I'm hearing constantly. So I do just want to offer that, as well as there's this rising attack for abortion censorship, there's also a lot of young people who are I need to be able to have this information because I don't have sex ed in my school. Let's do something about it. So the same online communities that they're trying to censor are kind of fighting back in a big way.
Yeah, I'm also frustrated as not a young person. I think you make a lot of really good points, Sarah, and you and I have talked about this for a long time. But let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about how activists and abortion providers have responded to this increased censorship. I mean, Michelle, as you pointed out, this has been happening before the Dobbs Supreme Court decision here in the U.S., but I think has ramped up probably since then. And so, Martha, I just love to go to you. Tell us, what has the response been like? How have pro-choice folks been fighting against this censorship?
Yeah, I would say that, as just a reminder, I think we probably all agree that, the internet is not all bad. Of course, for example, when, Women on Web was first created in 2005, it was this big revolutionary thing to be able to use the internet and share information and be able to actually provide care, like organizations like Women on Web and so many other provide access to more than 200 countries that are very, very restricted throughout the world. So yes, to your point, it's not, even though we're frustrated, it's good to remember that it's not all bad, and it's in our hands to be able to, take back our power and share accurate information as much as we can. And one thing that, of course, has been, I think, positive about this suppression of information is that we all realized that it's happening in a systemic way. It's affecting organizations as much in the US as worldwide, small and big, and has allowed us to kind of come together in many ways. So, and also I would say that this is happening, as we know, not only to organizations, but also to, I think someone mentioned before, influencers, for example, or, like individuals. I have, people that we work with, influencers that we know that say they've been to this, like TikTok or Instagram jail for a long time, and there's no way for them to be able to grow their account. So there are many ways that we're actually fighting back. One is that there is a solidarity that we see online between smaller and bigger accounts. The way that we share the information is different. We have great partners like actually all of you here. We do a lot of cross postings, work with a lot of creatives, and also try to work with as many artists as possible, not only because ultimately it's great and they always have a nice vision and way to get information, but because it's freedom of speech and it's an easier way to get information out. We tested it multiple times, including during SB8. Working with artists in Texas was the best way to actually get the word out without getting our content taken down. We've worked with Fight for the Future as much as with Women First Digital in a lot of activations, also on the ground, with a lot of great artists. Sarah and I, for example, were during South by Southwest, did a great activation with billboards and projections, calling out big tech and fighting, their policies that they have when it comes to surveillance, and then just like not paying attention to what's going on. And also, we were able to launch our coalition, which is called Repro Uncensored, which I know a lot of you are members of. Women First Digital is one of the co-chairs, which is this organization of internet freedom and reproductive health organizations fighting for the accurate share of information online, but also on the ground, empowering grassroots organizations, and also remembering that there's a lot of people who actually don't have very good access to internet, and all don't have, a laptop or a phone. And let's not forget about these people. That's a specific example, but we just did a great project with Women First Digital at Foster Minister in Dakar, in Senegal, during the biennial, where we tried to work with local creatives and curators, including this amazing Pan-African ecological organization called Kimpavita, which is there, and just activating the partners on the ground. So I can go on for a long time, but it has helped us to think more creatively in smaller scale, whether, Plenty has a great sticker campaign. We've distributed thousands and thousands of stickers. We did a great campaign at the MTA in New York, talking about, if, when, how, and where to get legal help and information. So it made us be more creative and come together in ways that maybe we hadn't before, and also branch out more. At least I can talk on behalf of Plenty and Women on Web. It made us a little more intersectional, made us go in spaces that maybe we're not so familiar with, and for many reasons, also because it helps the algorithm actually to just branch out and not just use one abortion all the time. And I think personally I can talk on my behalf, but I think it made us a little more curious also with, other ways and other forms of sharing the information. There's a lot of people that want to be part of the movement, I think, and would like to know how, and that has also helped them, given them agency, I think, in many ways.
For sure. I think, I can say for myself that I noticed a huge sort of push from, I'll say, primarily women after the Dobbs decision, where people were outraged, of course, rightfully so, I would say, and looking for something to do, right? Like they wanted to fight back, people who were not in an activist space before, not involved in these like various justice movements. You know, this had a real like immediate effect on their lives, and were looking for things to do. So yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Can I just add? It helped. I think helped. I think the fall of Roe was also a wake-up call for the U.S. to look at what's going on internationally and how, you know, the Green Wave movement, or, you know, people throughout the world in West Africa, Brazil, and so on, are actually dealing with extreme restrictive conditions, and how, to Sarah's point, also they keep having abortions, you know, for the longest time, and also it helped us. Help big organizations, the ones that maybe are closer to the US and to big tech, help small organizations also have a seat at the table. I mean, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but it helped us also hear from organizations like, for example, ODAS in West Africa, and how they have been struggling with a lot of censorship.
Yeah, and to talk more about how I think creators kind of have played a role in this, like I'm a creator on TikTok that talks about abortion a lot, and that was before I started working at Fight and like doing anti-censorship, like legislative work. And but when I was doing digital organizing around abortion access in Texas, we like what we've realized and what we've seen is that folks who want to talk about abortion like find a way to talk about abortion. And to talk about like TikTok jail, for example, like shadow banning on TikTok, like regardless of how much you feel it's anecdotal, we can like at least through community like information know that if you talk about abortion, if you talk about sex ed, if you talk about sex work, if you talk about topics that kind of fall under this landscape that we've been kind of alluding to, it does result in the algorithm impacting you in certain ways. And what we've seen on TikTok is that folks like literally have a double speak of like, you know, a lot of different words. Like we've all seen like abortion, but like the A is the at sign, like we, you know, like putting zeros where O's are. And like for me, as someone who was really raised in this like say abortion, like say the words, like we need to fight back against abortion stigma, like kind of like environment and community, especially in the South, it's kind of hard to see that. Like honestly, you know, it's kind of hard to see how we have to talk around abortion and talk around sex work. And I mean, I know, you know, for example, like sex work, you know, accounting became like a analogy for sex work because there was kind of this trend a few years ago about just calling you, I'm an accountant, I'm you know, I'm accounting, etc. And so those are the kinds of things that like if you but I do think it's encouraged me when I think about how the fact that like we will still continue to access this information. This is one way that people have learned how to access the information. And like it's not just the folks disseminating it, it's also the people who need to receive the information. Now I think we do kind of fall into this hole of like, what about the people who don't understand that, you know, to talk about access and et cetera, like what about the people who don't fall into that community of understanding, you know, around these terms, around this doublespeak, et cetera. But people found a way, and we continue to find a way. And I kind of am trying to navigate it myself, just like in terms of the person at Fight who's doing the social media, right? Like, you know, if I'm talking about abortion access, you know, as Martha's saying, there's all these ways that we have to get around it. And honestly, it's just one more thing that I don't want abortion funds who are stripped for time and capacity to have to worry about. I want them to be able to just talk about their work. But also it's just a phenomenon that's kind of naturally happening as shadow banning and censorship is like part of your daily life on social media, if that's what you use to access things.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I just want to add to that also the importance of our roles here, because being on the internet for more time, we also have authority. No, maybe I'm tackling this from a technical perspective, but also giving spaces to smaller organizations or the importance of our alliances are key for us to keep on fighting the algorithm on Google. And also talking about content creators. When this bad thing about Roe versus Wade took place in 2022, what happened? There was a big trend on TikTok about the penny royalty trend, no, in which people were sharing how to have abortion with herbs. First things first, I don't have anything against like this type of medicine with herbs, because we know that it's they come from an ancestor, so it's important to respect them. But I know that the risk of having content creators without having the good resources to base their content on is that when they mean good, they could affect other people, no? So of course it's also our roles to connect with the content creators. So yeah, it's fantastic, the voice and everything you're sharing on TikTok, on Instagram, wherever, but it's also for you to rely on these type of resources, no? Because if this goes out of control, I think if you Google, you can Google Rolling Stone penny royalty, and they even tagged Safe to Choose, one of our Women for Digital websites, in which they were like, okay, that was fantastic, but remember these protocols are like safer versus the others, so we just need to be careful. So our roles are very important, again, to provide the resources to content creators, to make alliances with other organizations in order to tackle the algorithm, so we can find balance and keep on fighting misinformation and also be visible online.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really excellent point, right? I mean, one of the sort of pitfalls of people kind of living online is there is an authority that is kind of given to your favorite creator because they're in your home, right? They're on your phone, you're looking at them all the time, and there is definitely that sort of risk of, folks having good intentions but not always having the right information. And particularly here in the US, you're not getting in the majority of states, you're not getting sex ed, right? You're not getting this information at school, taught to you by somebody who's like certified or licensed in it. And so you go to the internet, right? Because that's easy and accessible. So I think that's a really excellent point. I would love, and maybe this exists. I'm sure it does exist, but it'd be great to see like Planned Parenthood team up with, I don't know, Alex Earl, right? On TikTok, somebody with 4 million TikTok followers to be talking about these things. So yeah, I want to go to you, Adam. Just quickly, where have you seen activists fighting against this? How have you seen Planned Parenthood sort of fighting against this kind of censorship?
I think for us, the most important thing to remember is the power of community and how we need to continue to trust each other. When this bill first hit Pennsylvania, it was the ACLU that came to us about it because they are the experts on free speech. They are the folks that doing this fight in Pennsylvania. They're like, hey, you should probably take a look at this. So the relationship that we had built, the trust that we have for each other, it's like, yes, thank you for bringing this to our attention, and we are going to continue to push and fight for that because we know our lane, we understand the role that we can play in something like this, and we're going to follow that, and we're going to take the lead of our trusted partners and do this together. Coalition building is messy. It's not the easiest thing to do. If it was, we'd all be in a really fake place. But I think we all have very clear goals and clear objectives, and that is for everyone to be able to access the healthcare that they need affordably, equitably, not have to drive 3-4 hours multiple days to access abortion healthcare. And with our guiding star, our North Star, I think we're able to hit that. I have the idea of like hope is a discipline by abolitionist Mariam Kaba. I think that is like one of the most important things that we can remember in this work, both as like folks like us on this screen and even as folks who are listening. It's not easy, but it is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power of collaboration is powerful, for lack of a more articulate way to say that. But this is a great example, and I think Woodhull as an organization actually is a good example of this, right? We started out in the human rights, sexual freedom space, never really. I wouldn't say we didn't care about policies that affected the internet, but it wasn't something we were concerned about until Sesta Fosta came along. And, here we are, Sesta Fosta passed in 2018, and I feel like, sort of mired in this legislation around technology and the internet, because that's just where our work took us. And it's led to some really wonderful alliances and collaborations. And I like double thank you to everybody on this screen, because I know you all have sort of worked together before and continue to work together. And I think it's a great example for folks watching who might be involved in an organization that isn't necessarily in a reproductive justice space, but like can be really helpful. So I have sort of a question for folks listening at home. Do you all have any like tips for the folks on social media who are wanting to spread the word a little bit? Any hacks? I know, Sarah, you spoke about changing the words a little bit, and Michelle, you mentioned posting and cross-posting to sort of trick the algorithm. Any little bits of brilliance or advice you might want to share here today for folks who could use that information?
For me, I found that, and this is something I tell organizations a lot, is that you have a neighborhood online just like you have a neighborhood in person. And that's kind of like how I think, for me, for example, a lot of the young people who talk about COSA online actually come from fandom communities that are super active around something else. And that's just kind of happened naturally because that's a space that I'm active in. That's a space that I know well. And the something that I think about a lot is that for me, I work at a digital rights tech justice organization. So like for us, tech is everything, right? And I believe that like in a lot of ways, even though there are a lot of folks who, we want to meet where they are at in person, tech affects like how they go about their lives every day. We talk about abortion access from step A to step Z of an abortion seeker needing an abortion to accessing an abortion. There are ways that communicate via tech. There's internet to be searched. There is funds to be found. There's clinics to be found, etc. And that's true for literally everyone on the internet. So like what we found, for example, with fandoms is that, they are all online. They interact online. They talk online. They use Discord. They use all kinds of different messaging, social, etc. And so like that was my neighborhood online, folks who talked about books and media and fandoms. And that's who we've gotten talking about, COSA, about harm to trans youth online, etc., because it's just my neighborhood, right? So I want, and I think that like one of the things to think about also is just like, being authenticity is kind of like a hard thing. And I think that all of us work in like policy advocacy spaces. So like authenticity is hard, and also just like loaded sometimes. You don't want to put yourself online. Like, I mean, a lot of the social media is like video also, which is like different. Like when I was growing up on the internet, like I could make something go viral on Tumblr and no one had to know it was my face. Like, no one had to know it was my legal name, that kind of stuff. The internet's changing, but I think that like thinking about the space that you're in as your neighborhood, why do the people that are around you care about this issue? Really tapping into that. And also just like, we want information resources that are accessible, that, are easy to use, like all these kinds of things, like thinking about what you need and giving that to other people. I mean, these are all kind of vague tips, but I think that just like finding your neighborhood, finding why people care about something is really important. And it can be super localized as well. Like there are so many ways to activate your neighbors, even through online spaces, so I think that in a changing world where it's video, it's like it's just a little different than it used to be, helps a lot. And also just like not being, bogged down by the algorithm. Sometimes it takes just like consistency of posting or consistency of talking about something to really break through. There's a lot of folks who will talk to you about algorithms and ways to trick it and stuff like that. I think that it's a lot of like, putting extra time and energy into something that it might just be every day. You're like, what do I need to post about today? What do I care about today? Just like sending something out into the world and seeing what happens. For the everyday person is much better than like getting it and trying to trick the algorithm. I mean, it's not even fruitful for people who try to do it every day sometimes, talking to someone who's, in social media.
Absolutely. I love that concept of like your online community being your neighborhood. Any other thoughts before I move on to our next question? Yeah, go ahead, Martha.
I would just, to what Sarah was saying, I would, try to work or collaborate with accounts if they're interested and maybe are a little bit outside the space as well. I always find it, as I was saying, it helps against the algorithm, fighting the algorithm, but it's also cool, right? To try to become a little more intersectional if we can. And I would also say that what we have found very actually efficient is when one of our accounts is taken down, or if we feel that we're being shadow banned, to call our community and tell them, for example, when our TikTok account was taken down for more than a month, I tried to connect with the human rights department and multiple people at TikTok, and nothing happened for the longest time. And then we just posted about it and called out TikTok and told everyone to just comment and tag TikTok, and then in less than 24 hours we got our account back. So these things work. And then we have amazing partners like Amnesty International, who are doing great research and also are very great at connecting you if your account for any reason is taken down or you feel shadow banning. So, and also please reach out to, for sure, Plan C if you're interested, and we will make sure to, amplify or share. So to that extent, if you know any other account that you feel you could connect with and can help you amplify, please do.
Yeah, so I think those are really good suggestions, and I love to hear it. I know I struggle with the posting consistently. I find it a lot easier to just do the work. Posting about the work is not as much fun for me, but I'm working on it. So I would love to ask all of you, what would you like to see legislatively or from the social media companies? What sort of policy or procedure changes? If you had a wish list or a magic wand, what would you like to see to sort of further your work? And Michelle, I'll start with you.
Okay, maybe I'm dreaming, but to have the big text, to have open dialogue with international instances, not just focus on what is happening in the US, just because they have like the obligation. I mean, they wanted to monopolize this. You have the obligation to listen to other countries, to listen to other legislation and be more open, no? And if they have open dialogues with people here, other organizations, I think that will be great. Also, I would like them to teach their AI, because AI's role is changing results and how people engage with the internet. To teach them about abortion, no? Because depending on the type of AI or the way you formulate your question, maybe it, technically speaking, the prompt, it can tell you, no, that's something harmful, or they are going to actually share with you resources once they share some from Planned Parenthood, but sometimes like, no, like that I don't have the knowledge, and that goes beyond like what I can share, etc. No, so we really need to have them, at least teach them with the World Health Organization protocol, so they know like, okay, it's not that it's like risky, but you need to check maybe your current laws. Like, don't close the door immediately, no, because I know for sure that younger generations are interacting with ChatGPT, with Gemini more and more, and are even asking them to do their own work, but that's a different story. So we really need the AI to not add more stigma of the one that already exists. And yeah, I mean, hope for the best, no, like legislations, I mean, could change and adjust, thinking about the public health aspects instead of if you are okay or no with abortion. No, you need to normalize that happens, and like that to mitigate like health risk for the future. But yeah, that's my answer.
Absolutely. Let's dream it, right? I mean, that's how change happens. Adam, how about you?
Tough one. There's just so many because, I just feel like so many of these bills are attempts to support young people when what would really support young people would be like affordable housing, universal healthcare, universal basic income. There's so many cross movement issues. But for me specifically, I think, I come from an education background. It would be comprehensive and inclusive, sexual education, K through 12, pre-K through 12, all of that, mandated, taught by experts, not just the random gym teacher. And then also along thinking about cross movement issues, it would be some kind of solution to skyrocketing housing costs, so that families can live, individuals will be able to live, and they could spend more time on the internet then without having to think about where that extra income is coming from.
Yeah, right. Like we're talking about this as a specific issue in our conversation today, but these things aren't happening in a vacuum, of course, right? And so I love that you brought up some things that don't necessarily relate to censorship specifically or might not come to people's minds right away. Martha, what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, there's so many policies that I think Michelle was saying put in advance health and see abortion access and big tech abortion as actually a fundamental healthcare instead of trying to police, people's bodies. That would be great. Transparency, accountability from big tech. We can go on for hours, but we don't know why our content is taken down. We don't know how these decisions are being made. There is no transparency on how these things happen. We have instances even during COVID-19 where we know that, for example, Meta and Google established specific, guidelines, and they had a little window that would say this is, healthcare information. It would be great if they could do the same with abortion, with institutions like WHO, for example, and really, again, trying to frame this in a public health dialogue. I think it's a really big issue that, for example, Meta owns, right, like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. I think there has to be a diversification of this, platforms and access to information. And I mean, we can get into more specifics, but the way that Google, for example, operates and how they would support and keep taking money of fake clinics while as they take down, our accounts. I think this is a massive issue. The fact that these platforms don't understand often or don't care maybe to understand how 21st century abortion care looks like, and telehealth looks like. They ask us for all this information to prove that we have a physical location. They don't understand that a lot of organizations are international, or at least operate in different countries or states and so on. So I would say a better dialogue with public health experts and big tech would be amazing. And also I think what Michelle was saying, ethical AIs, better AIs, understanding what the future is. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to say that we just exposed with a lot of our partners a big issue that was happening with Bing that was actually filtering out accurate healthcare information. If you were to, for example, enter abortion financial support, whether this is in the US or internationally, you wouldn't get accurate results. Whereas if you misspell the word, you would then get a lot of accurate information. So there's so many things. So that shows that there was actually a filter, right? That was set up by whatever. And apparently Bing did not know about this. Anyway, there's so many of these instances happening. So yeah, just a better AI, thinking better of a future and the space that AI will be taking and is taking.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that the fact that Google really needs to think about the future as well. No, like the consequences of misinformation are the worst, because maybe anti-abortion people or scammers, because we have been victims of scammers, they download our videos from TikTok and use it on their own social media, and with the support of those videos, they are trying to sell like fake pills. No, like Safety Choose has been building a scam list on their page, but well, those are the consequences. No, and imagine these scammers taking advantage of AI and trying to sell the piece. Like, it's super risky. And at the same time, as there are content creators that are pro-choice and pro-abortion, there's also the other hand, no, that there are young generation who trust blindly what they find on the internet, and maybe within their homes, through their families, they are also victims of the political speech, no, making these daily conversations to have an impact on how they perceive, for example, abortion, no? So there should be more neutrality on the internet, because if not, they are going to make like Google a platform where you will be able to find more misinformation based on personal opinions versus transparency and neutral information that could potentially save like their lives, no? Meaning that normal people could be censoring themselves and they don't even notice it.
Yeah, excellent point. I'd like to add comprehensive media literacy and internet education to curriculum. I think is super important. But okay, Sarah, take us home. What's your wish list?
Yeah, my wish list is never ending. But I think that, I loved Adam's point. I I literally told lawmakers, this question of like, what's your other like when I oppose COSA, or when we talk about the problems about COSA or problems of bills that impact the digital privacy of young people, they're like, what's your other option then? What's your other option? You hate all of our legislation. It's like, if the only options on the table are censorship and endless war, and that's the only legislation we can push, then we are fundamentally failing young people. It is not about one bill that would just be more censorship of marginalized resources. But so that's why the list is endless, because when we're talking about abortion access, we're talking about comprehensive childcare from birth to adulthood. We're talking about housing. We're talking about internet access. I mean, Congress can barely get behind the fact that they should fund internet access for people. And in fact, when they actually have passed funding through the Affordable Connectivity Program, it was then like, now the funding is in flux. Like, I don't remember exactly where it is right now, but like, even when they can get legislation going that funds people's internet access, continuing to fund it is an issue. And I'm sure we'll continue to see that with, future administrations, et cetera. But when I think about what actually creates this ecosystem that we're talking about, where Google and Meta and TikTok, et cetera, have such a big impact on abortion access, we really don't want to be in this space where corporations really control the flow of information at all. Right? We're talking about like surveillance capitalism rules our ability to talk to each other. And that's where I think, for example, antitrust, these companies are too big, they control too much information. I mean, I think the fact that like Twitter, for example, a downfall of Twitter has like fundamentally changed how nonprofits talk, how advocates talk. Like, I mean, that's a problem, right? We are not in this place where legislative proposals are really trying to attack the system at hand, the surveillance capitalist business model, where these companies are collecting as much information as they can about you and, just trying to avoid legal liability on the censorship side. So I think that for me, it's antitrust, it's laws that protect people's digital privacy. I mean, we're talking about, basically, we are seeing a whole landscape of ways that abortion seekers are also surveilled, in addition to their information being censored. So, legislation around antitrust, keeping these companies smaller, not able to really control the flow of information and data as much as they currently are able to. Legislation increasing internet access and funding internet access for rural communities in particular, poorer communities in particular. And then also just like a commitment to protecting us from things like Comstock, like these future legislative proposals that we're seeing coming down the pipeline. I hope that, quote unquote pro-choice lawmakers can really get behind this idea that they can't just say that they're pro-choice, they have to actually fight back against the threats that we're seeing. And just to bring up like an example, right? Yelp actually did try to label these fake clinics, these quote unquote crisis pregnancy centers that are just luring people in and not really actually providing accurate health information. And Ken Paxton, the attorney general in my state, sued them over it. And they actually are, I think, still in the legal process. And they responded to that legislation, that legal challenge by taking down that labeling and then trying to put it back up. Like, there's ways that they've laid out this attack surface where even companies who try to do the thing are now going to take on legal liability. So what are we doing on the legislative side so that doesn't happen? Like, are we lobbying legislative proposals against fake clinics, right? Like, that clearly label them as misinformation so that companies can do that. Those are kinds of things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So I feel like we could probably talk about this for 3 hours, right? Or we could do like an entire censorship series about abortion access, reproductive health care, and all of this. But we are out of time for today. I want to thank all 4 of you. I really appreciated all of the wisdom you brought to the table today. And I will be putting a very long email together for all of our attendees with all of those wonderful resources. So thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I feel really a little inspired and a little sad about sort of the state of the world when it comes to abortion access. But I feel very blessed, I guess is the word, that we've got activists out there doing the work. So thank you to my panelists again for being here today. And thanks all of you for joining. I hope you learned something and I hope you feel fired up to change things. If you are feeling fired up and you don't know what to do, a really good thing to do would be to head to woodhullfoundation.org/donate and make a donation to Woodhull so we can continue doing our work, part of which includes educating the public with this series, which is always free to attend and will always have ASL interpretation. So thanks everybody for being here, and I'll see you next month.